Okay, let's wait maybe 1 or 2 minutes for an official start.
Because this has been recorded, I guess there's no room for a small talk until we start, right?
Oh, well, you feel free. Whatever you want to share with the public is fine.
Whatever you can share with the public.
It's always weird with the awkward silences at the beginning, right?
So Amandine, I don't know if this is like good news or bad news for you, but from the outside, it is good news overall that I'm happy that as time passes, I see more and more startup and small companies focusing on using AI for game development, and specifically reinforcement learning, which is my side of the field. So I'm like especially cautious of that side of the garden. But yeah, but it's happy that that even small companies are trying to do it, because I mean, it's more work opportunities for us, but also more like it just means that industry is going to have more of a say into one, how the research is conducted, and also what are the things that we're looking for within that technology. So yeah, it's always happy to see.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think also we may be able to talk about that later on, but in terms of adoption also, just the way game studios work and are financed, it's tricky for them to have in-house big research teams unless they are very large studios. Yeah. And so one way to help adopting a new technology, in my opinion, is actually through third parties, like through smaller companies who are just dedicated to one part of the problem and can just offer something really tailored to the way game studios work. So they don't have to adjust their model or the way they work to adopt a new technology, because it could take ages otherwise, just the time to have a budget to dedicate to research or to have a machine learning team, and then to try to justify the cost of that and everything. It can really take a long time otherwise.
Okay, guys, don't preempt the discussion.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Okay, I think we're gonna just officially start. People might be trailing in a little bit later, but also it's summertime, and I expect a lot of people are either on holiday or on a break. So yeah, just an official welcome. So this is the second ever panel discussion of our just starting iGGi seminar series. I didn't introduce myself last time, so maybe just quickly to me. I'm one of 2 iGGi managers, the one responsible for Queen Mary University, and I'm just here as a moderator. So our today's panel consists of, or comprises 5 people, well, 5, right? if I include myself, yeah, okay, 4 people. Which is our external speaker today is Amandine Flachs. So maybe we introduce each other one by one, and let's start with you, Amandine.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Amandine Flachs, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Wild Meta. So what we do is we are looking to help game developers create smarter and more human-like game AIs using machine learning. So we have developed our own framework to really create machine learning-based bots that are going to learn to play any kind of game, to be used as an NPC, a bot, or even a player. Before that, I used to work with early stage tech startups, especially very technical founders, helping them on everything non-technical. So kind of being a bridge between the tech and the non-tech aspects. I'm still involved in the startup ecosystem as a mentor, but also as a VC scout. And through my series of live video AMAs that I host on my YouTube channel and social media. And I do a bunch of other things. I mean, anyone following me on social media know that can be hard to track, but my main focus is right now bringing machine learning to more game companies. That's about me.
Thank you. Great. Just as a quick introduction, maybe I should say a little bit about our today's topic. So last time we actually discussed about the limitations of AI, or how to deal with them, I suppose. So in a way, this is almost the opposite today. This time, we are wondering, can the AI be worse? Can it fulfill other purposes, or what is the purpose of AI in games, and what expectations, I suppose, should it fulfill? It was Marco who suggested the topic, so maybe Marco, you can say a little bit about that towards the end, but let's first introduce maybe Dani Hernandez.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dani Hernandez, and I'm a final year PhD student. My focus so far has been on reinforcement learning, and more specifically on multi-agent reinforcement learning, and also more specifically on the specifics on how to accurately measure the quality or performance of an agent in a multi-agent scenario, because turns out that there is a lot of beautiful nuances to that notion. So yeah, you can ask me a lot of technicalities, and I'll try my best to answer them all. Thank you.
Okay, great, very concise. Cristiana Pacheco.
So my name is Cristiana. I'm also a last year PhD student with a background in computer games, mostly just design and programming. And for my PhD, what I focus on is in character believability and player believability. So what I look into is how to assess and model agent believability in video games, and how these things can be used to possibly develop AI from that. And yeah, that's essentially what I go into on a lot of my research. So, any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, cool. Marco.
Yeah,
I think you have prepared a little presentation even, right?
Yeah, I'm going to try to share the screen, but it's always a difficult thing to do. All right, can you all see the presentation?
Yes,
yeah, I hope so. If something goes wrong, yeah, just yell at me or let me know somehow. So let me switch up. All right,
yeah, that's good.
Much better now. So yeah, the date. I wanted to open up this topic with like a brief introduction of what I think an AI should do. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Marco Tot. I'm a first year iGGi student, and I'm also in the Game AI group in Mary. My research topic is actually trying to make the AI play better. So I'm all about the performance, all about the win rate, but my gaming perspective tells me that that's not the only thing that there is. Because we want to play with AI to have fun, right? And I'm going to start talking about the first person that I played the games with, which is my younger sister. And yeah, why was playing with her fun? Well, first of all, we were equally skilled. I didn't win all the time, she didn't win all the time. So yeah, it was fun to play with her. And we also improved at a similar rate, which meant that I didn't have to change my gaming body after like a month of playing the same game. I also noticed that she was constantly adapting to my strategies, and so did I. So there were a lot of emergent properties and emergent gameplay situations that happened, not only in adversarial ways, but also in cooperative ways. When we played together, as opposed to playing with some random people, we could do much better. And she could also be persuaded to let me win once in a while if I had a really bad day. Although I'm not really sure what the bad day is for a 6-year-old. So why was this all interesting? Well, it's because we played for fun. We didn't play for win. Of course, I tried to win and she did try to win, but at the end, we wanted to have fun, right? And this is like a cop-out slide because we all want to have fun. Yeah, a game should be fun. Yeah, AI should be fun. Yes, but what is fun for us? So I didn't want to stop on this slide. I wanted to see what is fun for me. So there was a Quantic Foundry website where you can do a test and see which gamer type you are. So I did a test and I found out that I'm like 98% interested in mastery, which is related to things such as high difficulty, challenges, thinking ahead, practice, and so on. And you can see it with the slides where I described playing with my sister. Those were the things that I was interested in. We were similar skill levels. We were adapting, improving at the same time. And if you check my other characteristics as a gamer, you see some social aspects that I like, but you see that I'm not that really into immersion and creativity. And I guess some of you for sure are interested in those things. So there are many gamer types that exist. There are gardeners, slayers, gladiators, skirmishers, explorers, architects, bards, and they're all interested in different stuff. Maybe someone who is a gardener doesn't really care about challenging aspects. Maybe they will care about social aspects. Maybe they will care about creative aspects. Somebody who is an explorer who doesn't really care that much about challenges. They care about exploring stuff. They care about new creative stuff that they can find. So what I think we should focus our AI on is first to see which types of players are actually playing our game. If we are doing something for an esports title or competitive Dota game or StarCraft game, for sure, crank up the difficulty, crank up the challenge all the way up. But if we're doing an exploration game, maybe a game such as Skyrim, then immersion might be the way to go. Or if we're doing something casual like, I don't know, Animal Crossing, I haven't played it, but I guess it's the social aspect in Animal Crossing, the collaboration between the human and the agent, that's much more important than the performance of an agent in if it can beat you in a mini game or not. So yeah, this is all from my introduction. I hope that we will get into these topics in greater detail later on. But for now, this is it. If you want to message me about this, just take a screenshot and we can talk after the seminar. Thank you very much.
Wow, great presentation and cool introduction as well. Can I just say gardening is a challenge for me, but
Okay.
it entirely depends on at least if you ask my garden. Okay, so shall we throw in the first maybe Marco, would you like to ask the first question to the panel, to your fellow panelists?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not sure what your gamer type would be, if you would prefer challenges or immersion or creativity, but I think that, in my opinion, like different types of games definitely deserve different types of focus on the AI. So there is a lot of focus on performance of the AI because I think that's the one thing that we can measure easily, not easily, but easier than the other things. But how important do you think actually trying to focus your attention to a certain part of the AI rather than just say, okay, we have this algorithm, we have this reinforcement learning thing, let it run for 7 days and whatever we get, we will publish it.
So when you say focusing on certain parts of the AI, can you be slightly more specific?
Yeah, so for example, if we want diverse strategies, if we don't want the AI to play the same thing all over again, if we want maybe collaboration between agents, because there have been many situations where agent can play well while it's on its own. And then when you place it to play with a human, then it crashes and burns completely. So those are all the things that we need to care about when we are making our AI. At least I think so. So I'm interested in your opinion as well.
Okay.
Happy to
Amandine.
go first. Yes.
Yes.
So happy to go first, especially as we are talking directly to game studios. And so we have a lot of different questions from games developers when we talk about using machine learning based bots. And that's the kind of thing that we need to clarify really quickly with them, because quite often they're not machine learning experts. And so they think, well, they may be tempted to think that, okay, you just launch your training and you could look at it a few months after and that's it, and we have to really explain them that it's not the case. And every time we speak to a new studio, there is first an introduction to the technology, but also always a step where we need to really deep dive into what the game is about, what the bots needs to do. And so you mentioned different aspects of games and different aspects of the AI, and I definitely think that it's super important to take that in consideration super early on. What do you want to achieve with your bots? You mentioned having different level of difficulty for certain type of games. It's obvious you need to have that, but for other type of games, that's not really the point, right? So understanding what the bots are going to be used for are going to have a big effect on how you're going to design them. And so I definitely think that this is something that more people need to understand first, to really establish what they want, what they need. And sometimes it may be a bit early for some of these questions, but that needs to be sorted out really early on. Otherwise, you can't just design something that is very generic and then try to refine it afterward. I mean, technically you could, but that doesn't make sense, right? You want to design the way it learns in a way that it's optimized for your goals. And so you need to have a very specific goals in the end. It's not just, yeah, fancy machine learning, we put that in a box and we get the results.
Would it be okay if I follow up from Amandine? So also regarding on the trying to be specific as to what you want with AI, I think that there is a lot of very clear decisions that can be made, which can really reduce the size of the problem. For instance, Marco, you mentioned how, there may be cases in which you want the AI to be collaborative. And so I'm thinking of these two cases, one fully competitive, like a fighting game like Tekken or Soul Calibur, and others which are, let's say like Overcooked, which are purely collaborative games. Then I do think that like before you, as Amandine said, before you start getting those computers crunching numbers, you really need to understand what do you want. So it is the algorithms that you would use to train an AI to become really good at a fighting game are maybe not fundamentally, but meaningfully different from the ones that you would try to use if you want a collaborative agent at the end of the day. And the sort of the focus of problems, like the places where the problems can arise, are going to be very different, and therefore the development for like logging and being able to have the right tools to analyze things really depends on like what your focus is on. So yeah, I do think that like it's really as a thesis of the question that you posited, it is really important to like try to understand what aspects you care about for the AI before you actually just start trying to train a really good AI.
Christiana, sorry.
I think I'm just gonna throw in more problems rather than solutions. But
oh, good.
But because to me, there's a bit of a complication that arises a bit from this, because you can go online and you can indeed do something like the Patrick one, where you figure out what type of player you are, and I guess yes, to the point, you can have an idea what type of players you need for a specific game. But how does this take into account the fact that people do change their player types over time? Because at least with some research that's out there, it shows. And I mean, we can see that kind of from ourselves as well. We're not always into the same things all the time. We don't always want to play exactly the same things or play it in the same way. As you said, Marco, you were playing with your sister and you would start adapting and having different play styles because whatever you were doing wasn't working anymore because your sister now was winning. And so you start adapting to that. So I'm actually wondering how that plays into this, when someone wants these bots to just, give us a machine learning bot to do stuff. But is this something you take into account as well, of trying to adapt to different scenarios or even just change their play styles entirely?
So if I understand the question, is the bot's learning linear or is it actually sort of branched?
Yeah, if essentially we just want a type of bot and you do that, or if there's also a chance of them kind of branching out, since it's, again, there's many different ways of playing things. And if one wants to do a human-like bot, I mean, we're changing. We change while we play and we do things differently. So that's what I'm wondering. Again, I know I was throwing more problems than solutions here, but I'm curious about that specific.
Yeah, so maybe Amandine will have like a good idea on this because of talking to like actual game development studios. I can just say from my own personal like perspective, I think that's really important. I think that when I see an AI that plays the same way all the time, like using the same strategy, just maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit quicker, maybe a little bit more precise, it's not as fun for me as when I see it actually develop different types of gameplay, game styles, and so on.
So yeah, I'm happy to answer on that. I would say something that my co-founder says a lot, but we can do anything. I mean, when you think about machine learning based bots, it's not machine learning on or off. You know, you can have kind of a mix between machine learning based bots and hard-coded bots, or scripted things and have different layers. So for example, you could imagine having a different situation where you call different type of bots, different type of AI, depending on the behavior of the players. Whatever the way you're recording that, you know, you can measure this in many different ways depending on the type of the game. And so you could have profiles, for example, or you could do something different where just Marco, you mentioned that it's boring when you have the AI doing always the same move and playing the same way. Well, we could actually play with the training of the AI and give it some kind of I don't like to use this term, but personality, you know, having an AI that is more aggressive, another one that is more cooperative, not just in terms of gameplay, but just it could be just slightly slight behavior, not necessarily just the entire purpose. And so, you know, when that's the thing, when you talk to studios directly, the thing that comes up is that they don't really care about that. Like, it's not like they want to have game AI in their game. They want to have the players to have a great experience and to have their creative vision purely made. And so it's all about finding the best way to make that happen using the best technology. And so sometimes the answer is not as straightforward as let's use game AI that is using machine learning. Sometimes it's more about understanding how the system currently works and where is the best way to include machine learning. So we had this discussion with a few studios that were very interested in the technology, but it's just about finding the best way to make that happen so it works for a specific game.
I have two amateur questions. I don't know if they are, you can tell me off. But would there be any merit in the player actually helping in the training, helping the learning? Because I guess going back to the experience, Marco, you had with your sister, that also is innately human, isn't it? That you sort of tell somebody else your tricks in a way. You teach them.
Well, if I can take that. So Marco, I don't want to do a plus one on what you've said, but in this very same room is my twin brother, with whom I've played games since we were little. And we had kind of the same situation, like we like the same kind of games. We were at a very similar skill level. We were like we were doing best responses to our own strategies, and maybe even like cyclic evolving, which wasn't really taking us anywhere. But and so I'm gonna say that there is an enormous amount of merit in actually helping in the training. So as an example that maybe most of you or some of you are familiar with, the game of Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, so the one for Switch, has this capability that you can buy these amiibos, which are essentially these statue-looking things that you can connect onto the Switch, and then you can train them. So you can play against them, and Nintendo hasn't mentioned how they actually work, and I've looked deeply for this. But it has got to be some amount of imitation learning of some sorts, coupled with a lot of like rule-based and if-elses and decision trees, etc., etc. And that, so I guess you could say that it takes off merit when it comes to the like academic or research question of like, oh, how can we, without any human intervention, get a good AI or an AI that is meaningful for our purpose? But also on a more engineering kind of side, it does make your life a lot easier if you have constant demonstration as to what's good and what's bad. And even taking it on the creative side, there are now tournaments just for these AIs that you train just by playing against themselves. So it even opens up like a gigantic amount of authorial intent, not by the game designers, but by the players themselves, if you actually allow them to play, which I think is like absolutely beautiful. So yeah, I do think there's like a lot of merit. And we have, I think, sorry for doing the moderator, but I just saw Charlie Ringe like raising his hand.
Yes, I saw that too, Charlie.
Before we take Charles' questions, may I just add something on just what you just said?
Yes.
So you talk about imitation learning, and that's very interesting because there have been a lot of people asking me about having your model constantly being trained on your players' gameplay. And so I know that technically it could be a thing, but that would be extremely expensive to make that happen. And I'm not sure that in terms of results, it's necessarily pertinent. While you could actually select a bunch of demonstration that you use and that you're using specifically the demonstration. And we see that a lot in games where humans are developing some techniques. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the work of OpenAI and DeepMind. And so these kind of mobile games, they are using a lot of techniques, like humans are using specific techniques, group techniques. And so that's something the AI may not be reproducing on their own. So you may have to show them that you can actually work together this way. And this way you end up with an AI that is more human-like, because the question of enjoying playing with the AI doesn't just come down to the win rate, or is it easy or not. It's also about, does it prepare me to play with other human players? Does it really replicate this feelings you have when you're playing with a human? Can you tell if that's a human? That's a big question. And I would love to reach a point where most people can't tell when they're playing a game if they're playing with a human or not.
And Christiana has a lot to say about that, by the way.
Yeah, but I'm wondering if we should let Charlie ask his question, because he's been raising his hand now for a little bit.
Yes, we earmark this and then come back to it. Charlie.
Funny enough, actually, Almondi kind of covered what I was going to talk about, which was first off, I would say that it's not necessarily always true that playing against an AI which is always does kind of the same sort of thing is boring, because if it was boring, then Dark Souls wouldn't exist. Because those sorts of games are designed around this kind of like core combat mechanic loop where you're trying to figure out the puzzle, almost like the AI is a puzzle rather than it's a human. But I was thinking more, questions about sorry, this is slightly rambly, about sort of how do you, what's the ideal sort of way to have authorial control into your AI systems, so that if you have a game where you kind of want a bit of variety, but you also want an experience, and you're designing for like a single player game where you want that experience that the player always has a similar sort of thing happen, how do you design, especially reinforcement learning, which is incredibly hard to control as far as I understand, and I'm not a machine learning reinforcement learning expert, but then secondly also is that when you talk about esports games, I would say that in an esports game you probably want an AI which is the best or close to the best, because really what you want that the job of that AI is to train players so that they're better at playing humans. But then again, you have to then, what you actually want is not necessarily an AI which is the best. You want an AI which is the best but also human-like. And then how do you do that? Because humans aren't necessarily optimal. So you have to get an AI which is kind of believable, or at least trains you as the player to act in a way which is useful when you're playing against humans. I guess I'll put it that way, because my experience of playing against esports bots is that usually you can figure out some key weakness and just exploit that ad nauseum until you win the game, and you can't have that in it. So how do you design those systems?
Yep, very good point. Christiana.
Okay, so I need to start tackling this slowly. This has been a lot of stuff suddenly coming up. Okay, so first of the question, or first, as Charlie pointed out and pretty well, it's just we don't, depending on which game you're using, and it's just what I found even on my research, people telling me this over and over again, is that depending on the game, you might want decent bots, or you might just not care for them at all. So for example, in Dark Souls, or at least in Soul games, I mean, I haven't played those, I've played Bloodborne, and the whole point of it is that, it's the repetitive, it's the puzzle-like thing of trying to dodge them so you can hit them, although I would say a slightly better nav mesh wouldn't kill them. But beyond that, it's mostly okay. However, with stuff like esports, It's complicated because again, yeah, it's the how do we make something, do we really want something that is incredibly good? I don't think the best is the way to go because again, I think what makes it fun to play, unless you go into the tournaments and you see those teams that have, you know, their jobs is to play the game and they're ridiculously good at it. For someone like them, maybe you do need almost the best because otherwise they don't really learn much from it. But I do think what the human counterpart brings to this is that they bring randomness, they bring different strategies. And I think that's why I wouldn't necessarily go for the best. I'm also not a reinforcement learning person, so that I will leave to Danny, to him to explain how you try to control a little bit more reinforcement learning, because that is not my area whatsoever. But what I would possibly suggest here is that one way at least of starting to tackle what the players would like is to ask them, because this can be a bit complicated. Again, this is something I do for my own research, and getting first data is a pain, and second, get people to agree on one thing is another pain. So, but at the end of the day, if you are trying to appeal to players, I think the best thing you can do is try to get play-oriented data, even if it is their own opinions on specific moments, for example, that do take the context into account, so that you can at least understand in which context what you need, if that makes any sense. But maybe I'm going a bit on a ramble here as well. So I think I'll let Danny try to at least tackle the reinforcement learning part first. and yeah, but in the end, my opinion is that I wouldn't go exactly for the best. I would go for different play styles, because that would, I think that in a sense would start helping people learn different ways of playing and different ways to defend themselves in Dota or in MOBA games, because then they see different strategies, and that's what would be better, I would say. Not that all strategies would be good against what you're doing, but I don't know, at least that's more towards what I'm shifting towards, rather than trying to always make incredibly good AI.
I'll pass that back to Danny just quickly.
Yeah, so branching a bit away from what Christiana said, and I'll try to keep this somewhat concise. And let's ignore all the amount of compute and money that you would need to dump into big machines to actually get AI which are superhuman, because essentially the better that you want your AI to be, you start getting diminishing returns on the amount of like compute versus skill gained per episode or like per simulation of the game. But so without focusing on that, what has been done so far, at least on the latest research, if you want to make really good AI to be close to human, is essentially, so if you have a lot of human data, so for instance, what they did for AlphaStar, so for the StarCraft 2 agent, they had a lot of data on what kind of item, so on what kind of build order, so how many units, what order you build the units, and also for different technologies and buildings. So they had all of these like build orders, and essentially they, on the more technicalities of it, they used as a regularizer the distance so the AI would build things, and then if it was too far away from the build order that humans have, then they would be severely penalized. And the idea is the following. So for the purposes of making AI to train esports player, maybe it is the case that having a completely different build order is better. But what you want to do is to make AIs which are like humans, perhaps slightly better, and then to train against those, because these AIs are a proxy to your actual players. So what you can do is then like use reinforcement learning, evolutionary methods, any sort of like game playing and like agent improving methods in artificial intelligence, but then regularize them to make them closer to essentially human data, without completely capping them and say you can't improve from this. And as a final thing, maybe in the future, thanks to work like Christiana's, we will be able to have believability of AIs as some very quantitative metric that we can have. So we can say, okay, your AI can improve over time as long as it remains believable in terms of this not yet born mathematical concept. And I'll leave it at that. And maybe Amandine, that because you've had like a lot of, or at least more than us, communication with actual studios, maybe Yeah, maybe you can tell us a bit more about if they, like if studios said, okay, we want really good AIs, but we also don't want them to be completely alien in terms of like player experience.
Yeah, so far, from the discussion I have had with studios, so far, it's not necessarily their main concern how human like the AI is. It's more about controls you have on the AI and a fear that it's going to be too good. And Danny, I'm sure it's going to make you smile because you know that in reality, it's not that easy to make an AI that is so good that it's going to beat everyone. But everyone look at the big researchers and the big example, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't want them to beat our players. So you know, it's all about explaining the things, but it hasn't been worried. It's more about specifically for a game, can this do this, can it do that? You know, game developers are just focusing for so long into their own game that it's really going to be more about very specific questions, like my game does this, it works this way, can the AI is going to be able to do that and this and have this kind of behavior. And also to get back to Charles' questions also on esports specifically, I would say that what you want as an esport professional is an AI that is going to be able to replicate the type of gameplay of your opponent. So let's say you're one of the big teams and you know that you're going to play a match with this other big team. Their own replays are available publicly. Then what you really want is actually to play with a double of this team, you know, an AI that is going to be playing exactly as this team plays. And that's what's going to prepare you and help you create human strategies against the strategies from the AI that is replicating the human players. And that's very complex and raises additional questions because training right now is still long and expensive. And so even if you were to train something rather generic at a high level, but then kind of refined it more toward the end to a specific gameplay or game style, it's still very complex to do today. But I think at some point, that's where the esports use specifically is going to go.
If I can chime in a little bit on the esports side, I was really interested in actually like making esports AI or how we should do it, and I think that we should make it as good as possible. So I agree, Charles, with what you said. Like we should want them to be the best, but we also need to make some limitations for them. For example, what Emmett said, like we want to replicate our opponent's gameplay. So we don't want our AI to be able to do something that a human isn't able to do. For example, in Dota or like OpenAI 5 that they didn't input any reflexes in the AI. So the AI could react immediately, which meant that it could interrupt every single of your abilities that you cast. In games such as AlphaStar, the first version that they made, they had no limitation on the APM, or they said like you can do this amount of actions per minute, because in StarCraft it's really important how many actions you can do at specific times in the game. So what the AI did was that it had 1 minute, it did no actions when it was not important, and then it spammed like 10,000 actions in 1 second when it was really, really, really important. So it showed such a robotic type of play, which wasn't really helpful for the esport players. There was a lot of noise on esport forums on Reddit because they said that the AI is actually cheating. The AI doesn't play like it should play. So there is a lot of barriers enforced on the AI so that it's a bit more fair while still trying to be as good as possible.
Just to give a different perspective on that, I understand that on esports and competitive setup, it's big questions from the players. Then when it comes to more massive adoption for all type of games, I would say this is a big advantage because the AI doesn't have to have the same capabilities that a human has. Maybe your AI is going to be able to see the entire map and doesn't have a fog of war, for example, or may be able to have additional data, and you can use that. So I would say, depending on your objective, you may actually not want to limit your AI and use everything, because it doesn't have to be fair. If you want adoption, and if you're building your AI for the player to enjoy it, then there is no limit, and no one is going to ask, oh, what does the AI sees? Does it have a fair advantage? Of course they do, but depending on your objective, you can actually use that at your advantage to either maybe limit the AI. You can do a very good AI, and then you tweak these kind of things to make it easier for maybe new players. You can actually use that at your advantage.
There was a contribution by Joe in the chat. Joe, do you just quickly want to jump in and say that?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that based on my work, and just because I talk to players of esport games and ask them about how they learnt the game, and I'm interested in how players learn to play. Is an interesting aspect of Counter-Strike called aim training maps, where basically players get these small environments that have been crafted by other players, and the AI in them is very, very simple, in that what they do, depending on how you set it up, is that, if you want to, say, practice clicking heads, then you can have it so that you have an arena full of bots, but they just kind of move side to side. So you can try and shoot as often as possible. And then another one is something called peeking, where when you turn around a corner, you stop immediately and fire, so that you reduce your recoil spray and do as much damage before someone else does damage. And what they do in these maps is that on key corners, you can have bots move side to side, so that when you start moving out, you'll see it and fire. And then you can start layering on, for example, on one of them, you can layer on that they'll fire back, and you can choose what weapon they have. So that if they have an AWP, then they'll basically one-shot kill you if you don't get them immediately. And so I was just I just brought it up as an example of where kind of very simple AI fulfilled a niche or a purpose that was required by players. Another point I was saying as well was that I found that the higher level players, the players who played at a higher level, basically use these a lot more, say, than newer players. I don't think that's a question of because of the AI or anything. I think it's just a question of where the players are ready to start looking into these skills. But that was just kind of what I wanted to bring up.
To me, sorry.
No, you go, Suzanne. I'm sorry.
In esports, it's quite a clear case that if you want to train up to a certain skill level, you probably want the AI to be challenging, right? So maybe we should more focus on cases where it's not about esports and competitive gaming in that sense, for the purpose of today's question, I would suggest. And I wanted to also ask, is there actually, are there metrics in place already how to measure the success of an AI? And if yes, what are they?
So success in terms of the game has been published already and people are playing it, and you can, so a metric for like, hey, has the AI system that we deployed work or not? Or like, is that the term of success that you're thinking about?
I guess just in general, maybe are there works, papers, publications that determine or help determine whether an AI has been deemed successful? For instance, is it successful if a lot of people, are attracted to the game due to the AI, or, that's, for instance, would be one metric.
I would say so. It's a very broad question, and it all depends on what's your expectation, what you do, what's your position. If you're a player, success for you will be that you're having a good time with the AI, and depending on the game, it just does what it's supposed to do and doesn't break your engagement in the game. There is nothing worse than playing a game and for example, you are playing a game where you have a squad with you, played by some AIs, and you give some orders to the AI next to you, and it's just going to do something else. It doesn't follow your orders, right? Or it's going to just do some crap and be not useful at all, and you're not going to be happy with that. And what we've seen on the players' side over the years is that people are complaining a lot about the AI, and there are massive movements. And what I fear right now is to see people just hating on bots, while the problem aren't the bots. The problem are the bots that are not good, and the games that are actually releasing a game that has a large portion of bots and they're not good enough. We've seen that with PUBG, for example, where everyone has been complaining because bots are just target practice, and you can have up to 80-90% of bots in a game. That's just crazy. So I think that's the player's perspective. But if you look at the game developers, what you want is your game to be a success, a commercial success, so you can do another one. And also you want the AI not to delay your time frame. You want to potentially be able to, I don't know, you have all the kind of metrics because of your own time frame and your own specific agenda. So I would say it's very broad. And then you also have us creating the AI and training the AI. You have this kind of metrics, and then it will again depend on your goal. Is it going to be a score? Is it going to be how it behaves? Is it going to be when you test it against humans and the feedback you get from that? So that's a very good point, what success is. And I would first look at your position, your objective, and take in consideration everyone else involved in the process, to have all the different level and layers of definition of success. It was definitely not a technical answer, but I guess that's a start.
It was a good answer. I guess I wanted to point out that maybe it's not true to a lot of designers. What's the success for them is what the purpose.
Well, designers,
is.
It's slightly different when you look at the designer perspective and the game creator, because here we're talking a lot about machine learning, reinforcement learning, and that's something that you don't necessarily have the skills internally. So how are you going to do that? Is it going to delay your game? Can it fit the time frame of your game? And machine learning works in a way that it's very not compatible with the way game developers work, in a sense that different skills, different mindset, you don't approach the problem the same way. You can't just say, I'm just adding more people into it and I get the results X time faster. So quantifying it is harder. So from the designer and the creator's perspective, I would say from the game creator's perspective, the big question is, how is it going to fit into my game? And what is going to be the impact of using a new technology within my game? Is it going to cost more money? If so, is it going to bring more money? Is it going to make less people complain about the bots, which means that they will maybe say, au contraire, they're good, so it will bring more people? Like, these kind of things have to be measured, but it takes time. You need first to have adoption to then measure that.
Yeah, brilliant points. We have another question from Charlie. Yes, we do have time, because we scheduled a little bit more generously this time for 90 minutes in total, if everybody is okay for that, hopefully. Oh, should I read it out? Or
well, I can read. It's pretty much that. Like, it's a very short kind of follow-up. It's kind of what
it's just because we're recording it, so people don't get what's in the chat. Yeah,
I'll read it out. I can't remember who was talking about this now. It's been a few minutes. It's come out of my brain. But I was thinking about was it Marco talking about Alpha Star and how fast it can play? Basically, I was thinking, like, is it interesting as reinforcement learning or like kind of AI for game playing researchers to think about kind of like putting in artificial kind of like actuation mechanisms in your game, so, or input mechanisms. So rather than the AI, rather than simply just inputs are just, a vector of features, and the output is just a vector of features which you softmax and choose the one which is the highest, or with some probability or whatever, in standard reinforcement learning. Is it more interesting to say, okay, so the AI wants to press this button, but actually, we then put on top of it some sort of like reaction time or some sort of some sort of like opportunity for it to like kind of misclick maybe, or something like that. Is that kind of like adding in human elements where we make mistakes with physical things which we don't necessarily think about, and that AI is very good at doing if it's just an AI simulation because they can do it perfectly. Is that interesting? I don't know.
Joe, in extension to that, tops it up with, would it be cooler if we built physical robots that played video games with existing physical controllers?
My feeling on that is the answer is yes. Every single game studio should have gigantic data centers with robots to play against. One individual robot per person playing.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that is definitely a thing that will make them more human-like. That was a difference between Dota from OpenAI and AlphaStar, is that Open5 used the input as a vector, and AlphaStar actually used the image. And it also had some chance to misclick as well because of the limitations on APM. So if it wanted to, like, let's say, select an army and then attack, if after selecting an army, it reached the limit, it couldn't attack anything. So there were some kind of mistakes that an AI did because of those limitations. And they definitely get recognized by the public. And it seems like, oh yeah, it actually makes mistakes. It's not perfect. It's human-like, let's say. But yeah, but I don't know how far we should go with it. That's something that should definitely be discussed, because what Joe said, should we have a physical robot? Yeah, maybe. But then it's a difference between why are you actually using physical robots? What do these limitations actually bring to you? Is that like just going over the board and trying to make a replication of a human player, like exactly with all our biological limitations? Should we calculate how fast our neuron signals go through our arms and our brain and then calculate the reflex time? Or is it enough just to have some approximation of it and just say, yeah, it looks human, it's good enough?
Would it be okay if I follow up from this? So then specifically, so starting with what you've said earlier regarding how AlphaStar was constrained to have certain actions per minute, but then it had these massive spikes every now and again. So I do think that's something that hasn't been mentioned, and I think it's very important, especially for researchers, to pay attention to, is the fact that certain metrics of fairness, which apply very readily to humans, may not apply as well to AI systems. Because you can have things like APM, so actions per minute, which is a very obvious thing, that then it crashes, as he mentioned earlier, for things like StarCraft 2. And therefore, so actually, just as a technical note, the way that they fixed it, and it was kind of weird, is that, and I do think there's got to be better approaches for this. They did have this APM constraint, but also essentially the neural network that takes an action also had an output that said, I am going to wait this much, like this long, to then take a further action. So there's a lot of like nuances and intricacies that you can do, but I just wanted to say that same metrics may not apply for AI systems. And so now going more directly on to Charlie's, because to Joe, yes, we should have robots, but also what Marcus said, like, what do we want all that money, like those robots for? So, but regarding Charlie's, I do think that on the notion of representation, so for the feature and action space, so having had both in private but also in academia, having trained a lot of AIs, it really is, it's annoying how there's sometimes this specific feature that is just like so helpful for the AI, and you can see that once you take that feature out, it takes forever to train. So let's say that you can have maybe a car game, and just so it's something like Destruction All Stars for PlayStation 5, if anybody knows about it. So it's like a MOBA, so there's like an arena and there's cars and you can like hit each other around. if you have a top-down view, which players don't have, in which you can see your position and maybe the other cars within your field of view position, that's already like massively helpful for reinforcement learning models. And you could argue that maybe that's cheating, because it is, because technically humans don't have that like a state as an input, but it severely benefits the training of this agent. So then at that point, you need to start having this like more realistic conversation with the people giving you money, which is like, hey, we can save all this money to train this agent, but we're actually not being as humane as we can, which obviously, ideally, you would be as humane as you can when it comes to what input and what outputs goes out in your model. But realistically speaking, unless you can spend billions of pounds, then it may just not be possible for many real games. So I do think that there is a lot of open and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit on representation, both for actions and for states when it comes to like training AI agents in games.
Yeah, all agreed. Anybody else on this? Okay, I think you summed it all up. Maybe do other panelists have questions for their fellow panelists? Christiana, you have been a bit quiet in the last 5 or 10 minutes. So maybe you have
no,
a
I was
question.
just trying to think about what was literally just discussed about action representation. And I mean, this is not something I specifically have dealt with, but I guess this might be a question or a theory, and people can just comment on it, because what I did for my work was that, as I said, I don't do specifically reinforcement learning or anything, but what I did was get people's inputs every moment for their gameplay. So it was a fairly simple study where I asked people to play a game and then to watch a video of them playing against that AI, and to try to see believability again as a moment-to-moment scenario. So once they watch the video, every single moment they can tell me, okay, I find this moment believable. So the believable in a sense that the opponent is behaving in the way they would expect in that scenario. And they can say yes, no throughout the whole video. And what this was useful for is that I managed to do some correlation analysis between, because I was collecting 55 features of the whole game. So this is to get the context of the game. So, you know, what is the enemy doing? What were you doing? What's the distance between you and the other player? What is happening essentially in the game at all times? And one of the things this was helpful for is to find which features were actually correlated to believability. And what I'm wondering because I haven't tested this, but what I'm wondering is if this could actually be really helpful to reduce your search spaces when you're doing training, by having people actively telling you what they find believable. So which features in your game seem to be correlated to the believability of your opponent. And if you can start ignoring some of the features that don't seem to show any correlation, and if this could actually be helpful to reduce your search spaces when you are training agents. Whoever wants to follow up with that. It's kind of like half question, half just dumping it in there. So
I'm not sure if it's a good follow-up, but I'd say that's exactly why it is so important to monitor the training of the AI from the moment you launch it, and keep an eye on the stats, keep an eye on what it's doing, and adjusting along the way. I think there are lots of people who think that you just create the best design for the best algorithm and the best design, and that's it. But then there is always a stage where you launch the training and then you adapt because it's not doing what you want. You couldn't have predicted that with the code. You need to see it in action. You need to see the training going and say, okay, so that's not exactly optimal for my objective. I need to tweak this and I need to change that. And so that's not just a phased work where you first work on the theory, then make it happen, then launch the training, and that's it. You actually have to do a lot of back and forth and try and fail. And so to get back to what you said, I think that's why it's so important to do that, to really monitor and try to improve at all time how the AI is learning, what it is learning, and make sure that it fits what you want it to learn.
Good answers. Danny, Marco, anyone on this?
I do have a follow-up, but it's slightly long, so if you want to go first, Marco.
Sure. So I can just do like a short take on this. I think it can definitely be useful, like gathering data about what seems human and what doesn't is always helpful when you do reinforcement learning. I think, in my opinion, like I haven't done that much designer-centered reinforcement learning. So I'm not sure how much this will help, but for starters, using that data in the beginning part of the reinforcement learning process, where you can maybe do some imitation learning or supervised learning, can definitely help and steer the AI, at least at the beginning, to a certain point or a certain direction. And then afterwards, when you have like that basic notion of what agents should behave like, then you can probably continue with standard reinforcement learning techniques to improve that behavior further on.
So to add more to precisely what Marco was saying, so I do think that I don't think it's being done at all, but I now that you mention it, Christiana, I do think that's a pretty cool idea. So if you have some notion of what is believable for a specific metrics for your specific game, I think that can actually really like guide you through searching like a certain parameters for your AI model. And I'll give an example. So imagine that you have a shooter game like CSGO. Turns out that because every game is buggy to a certain extent, maybe your agent really early on learns that it can maybe exploit certain collision bug and it can shoot people through walls, let's say. And maybe you don't really see this during training because you just see like a bunch of numbers going up. And then after a couple of days of training, you play against the AI and then you see that, oh man, that's an issue. But maybe it doesn't really matter what you do. There's not really a way to get your agent to not do that beyond just fixing the bug in the code, but maybe the game developers are too busy adding some of the features and they've seen that, you know, humans don't really like go here and start doing this like weird input, so they don't really get to this point. So if you have some notion of believability, then maybe your agent will not learn to like exploit that collision bug because humans don't do it. And therefore, because humans don't do it, it would not. So assuming believability as human-like behavior, you know, making those things analogous, then yeah, I do think that believability can help you overcome a lot of the really annoying and overfitting problems that things like reinforcement learning, evolutionary algorithms, and other agent generating like approaches have. So yeah, I do think that's super cool and should be used more in the future.
Cool. Are there scenarios when it is not desirable for an AI to be human-like?
Where it is or where it isn't desirable?
Where it isn't.
If your character is an AI, like if you have a game where your enemy is actually a robot and you want it to be very robotic, but also games where, sorry for the noise if you can hear that, but yeah, games where it's very important for the players to learn some patterns. And so you wouldn't want to have necessarily machine learning for that, because you want to control exactly the pattern of the attack. So the player learn from that. And especially for very hard games, there are also some games where that's the game, right? You have the same level that is exactly the same every time. And the idea is that you learn to play it perfectly and you do that again and again. So for that, you wouldn't want to have anything that is not set specifically to work this way, or anything that is made by a human, anything that is a human or human-like in the level for that. That's the few examples. But that, once again, there are so many type of games, so many different kind of games. There can be many other reasons why you wouldn't want to have something that is more human-like.
Definitely. For my garden game, I would not want the AI to be human-like like me and forget the watering.
I can definitely contribute to this because I've actively asked participants over and over again if they wanted believable AI, precisely because I wanted an answer where they, not specifically, I wanted a nuanced answer, I guess. And I did get that, where a lot of people said yes, but also a lot of people said it depends on the game. So in my experience, it depends on the game. If you have something, again, where you want people to just learn a pattern, like Amandine was saying, take, again, Dark Souls or something of the sort, suddenly adding randomness to something that's already so complicated, it might actually put people off, because one of the things that makes that game fun is precisely once you figure out the mechanics and you just do those perfect dodges and you hit on the right time and you kill your enemies. That's what makes the game fun. So actually making that more human-like might not be very nice in that specific game. And there are other games. I was trying to come up with any game that has like incredibly, the more silly sort of games. I don't know, like goat simulators and whatever, where any NPC in that game barely moves, and that's kind of the fun of it, because you can just ram into them and just destroy the whole city, and this is what makes it fun. But pick a game like GTA 5, where you can interact constantly with the people that walk on the streets and the NPCs that go with you on missions. And ideally, you want them to be a lot more human-like. And one of the things I got praised for was precisely that if you randomly stare at someone on the street, they'll go, "What the hell?" and insult you and say a bunch of words I'm not going to repeat here. But the point being that depending on the game, you might really need it, or it might actually put people off, because the whole point is for you to just have some random fun and you don't want to really think about it. And if you put someone that plays like you in there, it might actually not be very nice.
Yeah, I guess I'm just fascinated by the contradiction, because we use the vocabulary here to say, let's say, authentic, when we mean authentic to be like a human, but whereas actually it would be more authentic for the bot to behave like a bot, right? And I think there also is maybe that overlaps with the notion that there is probably a communication gap between the designers and what the algorithm designers need to do on their end. How to say, basically we're just creating a facade that pretends to be human, but really the backbone is something else. So it's a juxtaposition between this authenticity, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, there is also like those moments where the AI is buggy and not performing well are also the most memorable moments. So usually when you see a fun clip on YouTube or a game is popularized, it's because something fun happened with the AI. So for an example, I don't know if it was Elder Scrolls Skyrim or Oblivion, like you have an NPC that is a shopkeeper, and if they see you steal something in front of them, they will chase you. But you can get a bucket, place it on their head, because they're hard-coded not to notice anything. They place the bucket, they can't see anything, and then you can steal everything in the shop. And those are the moments that get recognized and get talked about with your game. So maybe if you make a perfect human-like AI, you lose that kind of like funny interactive moments as well.
I'd say, to be fair to game developers, it's not that they're hard-coded not to notice anything. It's more that they're not coded to notice stuff. Which is it's kind of just like, it's okay, game developers, you guys are working hard.
Yeah, it was definitely not the jab at game developers. It was just like, you can't, when you do some kind of scripting for the AI, you can't cover every possible situation. Like you can't know what are the things that the player will try. And with machine learning, you kind of breach that step because your machine learning agents can try a bunch of different stuff which human didn't really try to do. Like what you said, Danny, trying to shoot through a wall with specific inputs where you position yourself at a specific place. That's not something that humans will try to do, but an AI will definitely try to do everything.
Maybe we should aim to wrap things up soon. I would like to ask Amandine, who is quite a lot in touch with up and coming enterprises. So we have a bunch of researchers here. What would be your recommendation to them, basically, to, I suppose, transfer the game knowledge into the games industry practice? Yeah.
That's a tough question. But
yes,
yeah.
I know, sorry.
Well, I'd say game developers and the game industry is very different from an external point of view than from an insider point of view. And so as soon as you start talking to game developers, you realize that you are talking to creative people. And so sometimes if you, for example, do machine learning and you come super excited about this new technology and you know, the fact that you can build machine learning for video games, that's super cool. You are going to start talking about agents, talking about training, talking about compute. People in front of you may not understand that. And so right now we are at a stage where this technology isn't yet into the game studios, not yet. A few studios, a few large studios have the ability to have dedicated teams to understand, to do the research, but it's not something that yet is established. So I would say, my main recommendation would be to engage with them as early as possible and just do a lot of explanation, do a lot of, not just about what you do, how you can help, but also on the technical aspect, try to be a bridge, because they may not necessarily ask the question, or they may be asking question that means something else. And so reading between the lines, it's not as straightforward as talking to someone who understands what you're doing and the technology and its value also. And showing that is a big challenge. And it starts with the vocabulary you're using, but also showing the value, the purpose. And for that, understanding also how game studio works, how they funded, how they allocate budget, the different type of teams and how they're working together helps a lot, having this feet into the door. So yeah, I don't know if it's really useful. I don't know what's everyone's background with that, but that would be my 2 cents that we've learned, especially over the past few months. We basically pivoted the company, our business model earlier this year. And so we started being a bit more active and talking to more and more studios. And this has been extremely useful, especially the first few weeks where I realized, okay, the way I explain what we do doesn't work for them. So let's change that. And so I went to ask people I knew personally how they summarize what we do, how they explain them. And then I used that, I kind of stole that from them because that was the best way they could understand it. And that would be the best way that I explained it to other people with the same background. So it's sort of kind of try and miss, but I would say first speaking the same language is a big thing.
That's great to highlight that there's essentially a communication gap between academia, I suppose, and games practice. So,
and then adoption. Everything is about driving adoption. I personally, of course, I run a company, so I think about profit and just making a sustainable business, but also just having this technology or what we're working on being adopted by more companies, being something that becomes more common in the future will be the best reward. And I can imagine that for academia, that may be the best also approach. It's not just about the research paper you're publishing, but also about getting it used in some way by other companies that can make the most of it and just this way iterate and go to the next step.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Anybody else wants some? Yes, Marco.
I have a question for Amandine. So when you approach like game development studios, how do you tell them that like the AI system that you are going to make, like the machine learning AI system, you won't have that like step-by-step progression that you will have in a normal AI system? Let's say this week we are working on pathfinding. Next week we are working on collisions, or I don't know what else. So because in machine learning, you are kind of creating a model and then letting it run, and then you have like several test steps where you can see the performance of the AI. what is their reaction when they find out that there won't be like a progression system or something like that? What is your advice to, like, for somebody like us when we talk to developer studios, to say, yeah, like, it's not going to be the same process that you're used to?
So to be honest, I have never had these questions from studios, simply because I think that's because we are coming as an outsourcing company. So basically, when you are joining a team in-house, you have to think about their own time frame. They need to understand everything, what you do, kind of check on your progress and be able to guide you because you're part of the team. When you're coming as an external partner, as a company, they are not going to ask you that. So if you explain how you work and how it works, then so far no one asked us anything about that. This hasn't been a concern. We explain that clearly from the first call, and what we do is usually we have a first call that is very much an introductory call where we talk about the technology, answer all the questions they may have, explain how it works, explain what we look after and what kind of input we need from them, what the best stage, when we need to work together. And then we usually follow up with a very more specific meeting where we really deep dive into how it works, and then we come up with a solution, with a proposition. But I would say at no point we've been asked so far these kind of questions where because there is no nav mesh, there is no just pathfinding, it's all together. So yeah, so far I think because we have this first call where we explain the technology and take the time to just talk about genuinely about machine learning, what we need to have access to, they understand that, okay, they give us the game and we do what we can with what we have, basically. So it's more about talking about what we need, the inputs, what we can use, rather than talking about these kind of steps where they check on us, because so far, yeah, that hasn't been asked. So I think if you join a team in-house, they may ask you for that, and so it's all about showing different things, and being upfront about that. You can always find ways to show progression. So it's just some people in games don't understand necessarily that machine learning doesn't work the same way, and it's all about just being upfront about how it works, what you need, and what you can't provide, really, just by the way it works.
I don't want to bombard Amandine with questions, but would it be okay, Susan, if I ask?
Yes, sure.
And thank you, Amandine, for answering so much. So I guess something that I often worry about, and I haven't had the honor yet of working closely with a small game developer, or just like a game developer, but so things like making end-to-end AI systems like via reinforcement learning or other evolutionary methods or other things, it doesn't always work, in the sense that it may be that you spend a few months working on something and you see that to continue down that path would just require too much amount of money, too much amount of development, and it's just not feasible for the project that you're in. How do you, I guess, internally deal with that, and how do you communicate that with the game developers? I don't know if it's like too involved of a question.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So yes, there are some uncertain there are some things that yeah. Something like that. So you can't control everything, and once again, that's why we make sure to deep dive and to understand what's the expectations of the studios. And we wouldn't accept a project if we don't feel confident we can do it. So sometimes it can mean just having one technique in our heads, thinking, oh, we will do it this way, and then talking to the studios more and thinking, okay, so maybe not, or from their budget. Game studios have limited budgets, very limited budgets, I would say. So it's all about making sure you understand what you can do with what amount of money and being clear with that. But then when you're a company, when you engage yourself into doing something, you have a contract. You said, I'm going to do this for this amount of money during this amount of time. You need to do it. And so it could be that you have lots of plans in case your first choice of techniques or your first choice doesn't work out, but you need to make sure that you can actually deliver. And so that's why we don't really go to talk to some studios and just accept to work with anyone and just waste time on something that wouldn't really end up on a real thing, right? So in our case, we have developed our core technology in a way that we are not building from scratch the AI system for every game. So we have built a system that is reusable for any kind of game. And we are going to announce really soon some integration with the major engines. So, we have spent lots of time to build this technology. So we are reducing the amount of uncertainties. They are already something that we can use. Our system works, it's ready to be used in many kind of games. And that's the way we feel a bit more confident. Now, internally, it's tough every time you talk to someone and someone asks you about the price to do that. And that's actually quite often the first question, like, how much would it be to have an AI that play my games that is this kind of game? And the question is never straightforward. It's always, okay, let's look at what you have. What's your deadline? You have also lots of games that keep the game AI for the end. And so sometimes they don't even think it through too much. And then when they come closer to the release, they have a bit more budget and they think, okay, it's important for the game to have a good game AI. Let's put a bit more effort into that. But then that machine learning, you can't just come up with something in a few weeks, right? You need to have time for training. The complexity of the game is going to change a lot how you're going to design the AI, how much training you need. Do you have access to the compute right now or not? Can you control that? Because you need to take that in consideration too in your pricing. So all these kind of things internally as an entrepreneur, it's tough. But luckily, I have an amazing co-founder. And so we always bounce back ideas. And we know that we wouldn't engage ourselves in a project where we're not confident we can achieve what we say we can achieve. So unless you come in a team, you're hired by a studio and it's clear that there are some uncertainties in what you do and they know about it because they have done the research and they hired someone who does machine learning because they understand that. Otherwise, I will make sure it's very clear that the results are not guaranteed. And if you are like a third party like us, it's all about picking the right project for what you can do, or discuss with the companies that is open with that.
Thank you. That's super informative.
Thanks. Well, you can reach out anytime if you want to chat further, depending on your own situation and plans for the future.
Great. Maybe one last word from Christiana before we wrap up.
I mean, unfortunately, what I have to say is more questions.
No.
And
Okay,
I know I
one
can't
quick
do
one.
it, but I think it's just because I'm quite curious how you managed to come up with a system that it's very game independent. So you just can look at a company and go, okay, cool, tell me what you need. And you just do stuff from your own. So because and then there's the thing, I'm not exactly sure you can answer that to begin with because, NDAs and all that. But what I'm wondering is if you have at least written blogs, papers, anything that hints at what you're doing so that, I don't know, people like ourselves that don't have access to anything at all can perhaps attempt something similar one day or...
Yeah, we actually, I think we are pretty transparent about our technology and what we've built. We have one blog that is fairly technical from my co-founder that is about our first demonstration on Dota 2 and the results we have on training our AI just for 24 hours it was. So yeah, we have a blog post for that. We have another blog coming soon. It's not, well, it's still in the making, but it's going to be more focusing on the integration with the engine. So it may answer your questions for that. I would say, to answer your question, it's not about building a system that is going to simply work with every game, that it's not that straightforward, because every game is different. Every game has different needs when it comes to the game AI. But then it has been more about removing everything that you would need to do again and again and again. So we can simply connect with the game. We can simply get access to what we need, and it's about building the building blocks. We could actually license this technology if it was machine learning researchers using it within the game studios. But since it's not, we have to actually offer the full service. But yeah, it's the entire system that enables us to actually take the game, look at what we need, and just have saved months and months of time with a system that we know is going to work well with this engine, and get access to the right games and to the right things within the game, and be able to play it and this kind of things. And yeah, my co-founder is going to do soon in October a presentation, a technical presentation, where he's going to talk more about our framework and the challenges that we've had. So yeah, it's late October, so it's not soon, and I don't think that he'll have the time to write too much before that. But we actually want to be more transparent and to talk more about it. So hopefully we'll be able to push more content. But also, it's not really super, like, because we are a small team. When we put some effort into creating content, we also need to think about the objective of this content. And yes, this can be very useful for a bunch of people, but our target audience are the game developers. And well, some of them may be familiar, but when you're creating content, it's all about finding the right balance between the level of technicality. People that are going to come across your content are going to like, is it going to fit what they understand or not? And we always kind of puzzled when we look at creating a new blog post between doing content that is very accurate and gives a lot of information about how our system works, and making something that is accessible for anyone to understand, even if they don't understand machine learning. And this balance, it's very hard when you're a company and you're like, okay, we don't want to be too techy because no one is going to read that. But in the same time, the few people who understand it, they will find it interesting. So yeah, hopefully more will come soon.
That's great. Really, really great. So maybe I can wrap this up now, and related to that, you hinted that you might also maybe feature in our upcoming conference for viewers. I think most iGGi viewers on here know that we have a conference coming up on the 8th and 9th of September. So we will actually for the first time have a little industry space as well, where we feature members of industry, and Amandine we had discussed previously, didn't we, that you might also join. So that would be absolutely great. What's left to announce is our next seminar. The third one is coming up on the 18th of August. We already have a topic. It will be on will VR and AR overtake smartphones as the biggest computing platform? So it's about immersive technology, and we have definitely confirmed Saul Rogers from Rewind. I think Guy Davidson will be on board again, and from iGGi's end, it's going to be Carlos Gonzalez Diaz. So far, we are still looking for a fourth panelist. So that's still to come. Thank you so much, Amandine, for joining us. Wonderful, Marco, Dani, Christiana, you were all really, really brilliant, and whoever else contributed in the chat, Joe and Charlie. Yes, I know. Sorry, thanks. So thank you all. Have a great weekend. It is now, and hopefully see you all again soon.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with everything.
Bye.